Welcome back everyone. In this video we will see the time when Jesus was crucified, a supposed Bible contradiction. The crucifixion of Jesus is a crucial event described in the Bible, but it is recounted from 4 different perspectives, sometimes giving rise to seemingly contradictory statements. It is therefore very important to consider the varying perspectives of the Gospel writers while viewing the Gospels as 4 eyewitness accounts, each given from a different point of view. Skeptics believe that the Bible indicates a contradiction in the hour of Jesus' crucifixion in the Gospels of Mark and John. The Gospel of Mark states that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour, which is at about 9 in the morning under a Jewish or common reckoning time system, which starts the day at sunrise. However, the Gospel of John states that Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, at the final trial, sentenced Jesus to crucifixion at about the 6th hour. Mark 15:25. Now it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. John 19:14-16. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. In the Gospel of Mark, crucifixion takes place at the 3rd hour and Jesus' death at the 9th hour. The Gospel of John states that Jesus was crucified sometime after the 6th hour. This happened at the end of Jesus' final trial before Pilate. So John's account supposedly states that Jesus' trial ended 3 hours after Mark states that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour. If John was using the same time reckoning system as Mark, then Jesus was not yet on the cross around noontime that day. The Gospels then appear to present a chronological contradiction of when Jesus was lifted up on the cross. We know from the 4 canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John that Jesus was arrested at night and was brought to Pilate the next morning. Jesus was brought before Pilate very early in the morning while it was still night, at the beginning of the 4th or last night watch of 3 hours. There were also hearings before Herod, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover. But Pilate had to make the final decision and attempted to set Jesus free, but ultimately felt it more advantageous to appease the crowd and declared himself innocent. Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. In the Gospels, we read of Peter's threefold denial before the rooster crows. Jesus is delivered to Pilate the first time early in the morning. Jesus was with Pilate the second time just before the final decision about the 6th hour. Jesus was then crucified at the 3rd hour. Darkness covers the earth about the 6th to 9th hour. Jesus dies at about the 9th hour. With the exception of the relevant issue, we notice that the Gospel writers are consistent as to the other chronology of events with given time indicators. There is agreement that Peter denied Jesus before the rooster crowed in the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark and John agree that Jesus was initially delivered to Pilate very early in the morning, and Matthew, Mark and Luke agree that darkness fell over the earth at or about the 6th until the 9th hour. And Matthew and Mark and Luke implicitly agree that Jesus died at or about the 9th hour. So, according to the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour, darkness descended at the 6th hour until the 9th hour, and Jesus died at about the 9th hour. Jesus was on the cross for about 6 hours, 3 of those in total darkness. But John in his Gospel says that the hearing before Pilate and Jesus sentenced by him happened at about the 6th hour, and after that Jesus' crucifixion and subsequently his death happened. John seems to place these events at about noon, at the 6th hour, which conflicts with Mark's account, which records that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour. Mark mentions the 6th hour a few verses later in chapter 15, when he describes the darkness that covered the earth from the 6th hour until the 9th hour. When we read Mark 15, we find that the 3rd hour mentioned in verse 25 is when Jesus was actually nailed to the cross. The verses leading up to the crucifixion speak of Jesus being led away from his final trial from Pilate, being scourged, being given a purple robe and a crown of thorns, being hit and mocked by the soldiers, being stripped of the purple robe and given back his own clothes, being led to Golgotha, having Simon of Cyrene carry his cross, and being given wine mixed with myrrh to drink. Mark describes the actual crucifixion, the last of the events to have occurred at the third hour. When we read John 19, we see that the sixth hour mentioned is when Jesus was sentenced by Pilate. Before that, we see Jesus being mocked and scourged by the Roman soldiers, a crown of thorns put on his head, a purple robe given and is hit. Then Pilate, despite finding no fault in Jesus and failing to free him, decides to hand him over to the people. John describes the last event of Pilate delivering Jesus to the people to have happened at the sixth hour. After this event at the sixth hour, Jesus is made to carry his cross and is crucified at Golgotha and dies later. John's account that Jesus' trial before Pilate took place about the sixth hour does not seem to fit in with the Synoptic Gospels, which state that Jesus was crucified by them at the third hour, and that darkness came over the land from the sixth hour to the ninth hour. Thus, the commentaries claim that the time given in John's account is wrong and not the one given in Mark's account. A contradiction occurs when two or more claims conflict with one another so that they cannot simultaneously be true in the same sense and at the same time. This is not a Bible contradiction if the Gospels of Mark and John used different ways of designating or telling time, just like in normal use of time. The sixth hour mentioned in John 19:14-16 is unlikely noon. It is therefore possible to harmonize the events of John 19:14-16 and Mark 15:25 if both describe events taking place in the morning. According to Mark, Jesus was crucified at the third hour and died at the ninth hour. This is consistent with the accounts of Matthew and Luke and shows that the third hour mentioned in Mark 15:25 could not be the same as the sixth hour in John 19:14. When we read John's account, we find a much different scene being described as the sixth hour than that which is described as the third hour in Mark's account. In John's account, Jesus is still standing before Pilate at this time. In the verses leading up to John 19:14, we read of Pilate, after attempting to release Jesus, decides to deliver Jesus to the people to be crucified for blasphemy, for claiming to be God at about the sixth hour. So, at the end of the trial, Jesus was sentenced, at the end of the night and the beginning of the day. It is most probable that within 3 hours before daytime, Jesus was interviewed by Pilate as well as by Herod, whom Jesus refused to answer, and that he had returned to Pilate for the final sentence at the beginning of the day. A quick comparison of these two accounts shows that they are not describing the same events. Mark is speaking of the moment when Jesus was actually crucified, while John is referring to the time at which the Jews made their final demand for Jesus to be crucified. Thus, if John 19:14 originally read the third hour, then we would still have a contradiction between these two passages. They would then be claiming that Jesus was in two completely different places at the same time. In between the sixth hour of John's account and the third hour of Mark's account, Jesus was stripped of the purple robe and was clothed in his own garments again. Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry the cross from Pilate's judgment hall to Golgotha. Jesus warns the women of Jerusalem who were mourning for him. Jesus was then stripped of his garments again and was offered wine mixed with myrrh before being nailed to the cross. A lengthy chain of events takes place before Jesus was actually crucified. On careful examination, we see that John is using the Roman method of counting time. So, according to John, Pilate's judgment of Jesus occurs at about 6 in the morning, not about midday or noon, as would be required on the Jewish method of counting time. Thus, instead of disagreeing with the other Gospels, John's statement coincides well with them. Mark's Gospel states that the Jewish council reached a decision very early in the morning. Thus, Pilate's judgment happens at sufficiently early at an hour for it to be described as being around the sixth hour, about 6 a.m. Therefore, John's sixth hour was the hour which the Roman government would have recorded as the time of Jesus' sentencing, while Mark's third hour was the time that the Jews would have noted as the time that they saw Jesus on the cross. In other words, John was using the Roman method of counting time, while Mark was using the Jewish method. During the time of the New Testament, there were two ways of telling time, the Roman and the Jewish timekeeping. The Bible tells us about the common way of counting the 12 hours of daylight from sunrise to sunset, that is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Hours at night were counted from sunset to sunrise, that is from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The division of the day according to the Jews was in 4 parts. The first part was from the rising of the sun till our time 9 in the morning, that is 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. 9 a.m. called the third hour. The second part was from the third hour to the sixth hour, that is 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at noon. The third division was from the sixth hour to the ninth hour, that is 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the afternoon, that is modern time. The fourth division was from the ninth hour to sunset, that is from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. in our timings. Similarly, division of night into 4 parts is from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. In the Gospels, we see different time references on the day of Jesus' crucifixion. The sixth hour mentioned in John 19:14 was at the end of the night, that is at dawn or early in the morning. This was the end of the fourth night watch, which is 3 hours till sunrise, that is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., the period that day laborers were hired at the marketplaces. The sixth hour was as each hour numbered at the end of the period of 1 hour. So the sixth hour, that is 6 a.m. of the later part of the night, stood for the 0th hour of the day, which is the end of the night and beginning of the day. The third hour, which is the hour of crucifixion, stated in Mark 15:25, is 9 a.m. After the sentencing at 6 a.m., in 3 hours before the crucifixion, preparations were made. 2 criminals were taken. Necessary formalities were completed. Jesus was mocked a second time, was made to carry the cross to Golgotha with the help of Simon of Cyrene, and then was crucified. Thus, in Mark's account, crucifixion takes place at the third hour, that is 9 a.m., and Jesus' death at the ninth hour, that is 3 p.m. The events described in John 19:14-16, that is Jesus questioned by Pilate at the 6th hour, took place early in the morning and not at noon as suggested by the context in John 18:28. John 18:28, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. The accounts of Matthew, Mark and Luke tell us that Jesus faced Pilate for questioning early in the morning, at which time he was also sentenced to crucifixion. In John 18:18 and 18:25, we see that it was cold and people were warming themselves, indicating that it was early in the morning. In Mark 14:54 and Luke 22:54-55, we see that Peter warms himself at the fire and a rooster crows after he denies Jesus thrice. The contexts of John 19:14-16 and Mark 15:25 are in agreement that the events taking place were during the morning, that is the 6th hour or 6 a.m. Roman time and modern time. The Gospel of Matthew was written primarily with a Jewish audience, and Mark's reference to the 6th and 9th hours, coinciding with Matthew's way of referring to the time for the same events, suggests that Mark is also using the Jewish method of designating time. Thus, Mark 15:25, referring to the third hour, is using the Jewish method of timekeeping. In Mark 15:33-37, we see that it was at the 6th hour that there was darkness that spread over the land during Jesus' crucifixion till the 9th hour, when Jesus breathes his last, which is also stated in Matthew 27:45-50 and Luke 23:44-46. Also, Mark 15:34 coincides with Matthew 27:46 about the time when Jesus breathed his last at the 9th hour, which further tells us that Mark's reference to time is in accordance with the Jewish method of timekeeping. The Gospel of Mark, when studied through the Old Testament lens, tells us that Mark penned it for a Jewish audience. In Jewish designation of time, the third hour would correspond to the modern time reckoning of 9 a.m. Therefore, John 19:14-16 indicates Roman means of timekeeping, in contrast to Mark 15:25's use of Jewish timekeeping. The Gospel of John is the last Gospel to be written, so it is not surprising that the Apostle John was writing to a Gentile audience using a Roman method of timekeeping. Also, John 19:34-35 indicates that one of the Roman soldiers became a believer and witnessed concerning Jesus' crucifixion, probably giving us the source material for the historical contents of John 19. Romans began their day during midnight, seen from several historical sources, such as stated by Censorinus. The Roman method of timekeeping and beginning of the day has been going on for 300 years, which would have included the 1st century when the Gospel of John was written. Since John 19 involves Roman soldiers and magistrates, it is not surprising that Roman civil time beginning at midnight was quoted. And since John 19:14 is using Roman designation for time and Roman day began at midnight like modern time, we see the 6th hour in John 19:14 refers to roughly 6 a.m. our time. Thus, John's description of pre-crucifixion events in John 19:14-16 taking place at about 6 a.m. does not conflict with Mark's description of crucifixion event in Mark 15:25 taking place at 9 a.m. Thus, since the Roman 6th hour is sequentially before the Jewish 3rd hour, that is 9 a.m. modern time, which Mark 15:25 designates as when Jesus was crucified, there is therefore no Bible contradiction here, as the different time notations refer to different specific events. Skeptics assume that the Roman method would be inconsistent with John's other notations of time in his Gospel, that John appears to use the traditional sun-up to sundown frame of reference when referring to time in John 1:39, where the 10th hour seems to refer to late afternoon, that is 4 p.m. and not 10 a.m. But clearly, John uses the Roman method of time notation in John 1:35-39. When John the Baptist points out at Jesus as the Lamb of God, two of John's disciples hear him say that and follow Jesus. They go to the place where Jesus was staying and spend that day with him, and John mentions that it was about the 10th hour. On the Jewish reckoning, the 10th hour is 4 p.m. and the day finishes at 6 p.m. It is hard to see in what sense the disciples spent that day with Jesus if the incident occurred at 4 p.m. as the day gets over by 6 p.m. But on the Roman reckoning, this happens at 10 a.m. and staying the day with Jesus is a more meaningful way of expressing what happened. The time indication in John 11:9 is simply John quoting Jesus' words. We see a Jewish conception of a day based on Jesus' statement, "Are there not 12 hours in a day?" We see several other Roman time notations in the Gospel of John and in the book of Acts and the Epistles, references to support that the day started at midnight in the Roman conception. We see a contrast with the Synoptic Gospels on how John views the day on the night of the resurrection. John writes, "On the evening of that day, the first day of the week." In this case, the proof that evening refers to a time after dark comes from Luke's Gospel, which not only records this event but indicates more exactly the time of day at which it occurred, to have taken place after sundown. Jesus appears to two disciples on the way to Emmaus and is constrained to come to their place because it was nearly evening, that is, the day was almost over. We then have to allow time for the preparation of a meal and them going back the 7-mile hill track to Jerusalem, where they meet with the 11 and share their experience of the resurrected Jesus. Only then does Jesus appear to them on the evening of the first day of the week. So, John can't be thinking in Jewish terms because invariably the evening of a Jewish day precedes the morning and it would be the next day. John used the Roman method of counting, otherwise this resurrection appearance would have been on the evening of the second day of the week. If these resurrection appearances had taken place on the second day of the week according to the Jewish reckoning, that would have altered the balance of evidence in regard to the importance of the Lord's Day in the life of the church. In John 4:1-8, Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, wearied from his journey from Judea. John says that this was about the 6th hour. While one could imagine being weary at about noon or at 6 p.m., the distance covered by Jesus from Jerusalem to Sychar would have made it difficult to get there by noon. Also, a more natural time for drawing water by the Samaritan woman and the disciples going to purchase food would be toward evening than at noon. Lastly, in John 4:46-54, Jesus heals a nobleman's son at Cana who comes from Capernaum at the 7th hour. Jesus does not go to Capernaum, but speaks a word of healing from Cana. The nobleman does not make the return journey of about 20 miles until the next day, when his servants meet him on the way to tell him that the fever left his son the previous day at the 7th hour. It could be reasoned that if the time was only 1 p.m. in the afternoon, he would have returned that day to see his son, but a Roman reckoning from noon would have made it 7 p.m. in the evening, too late to return that night. These examples support a view of time reckoning that starts the day at midnight in John's Gospel. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels, which simply means that they look at the events they record from the same point of view, implying that John's Gospel is different, one small point of difference being the time notations. Anyone who reads the Synoptic Gospels with care learns that these writers counted time in a different way from ourselves. 2 Timothy 4:2 Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and teaching. Thanks for watching. God bless you all.